The sky was painted in shades of soft gray, the kind that wrapped the morning in a calm stillness. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves, and the silence was broken only by the crunch of gravel under worn sneakers. Thomas Reynolds walked with his hands in the pockets of his coat, head bowed slightly against the cool air. His walks had become a ritual, perhaps more out of survival than routine. They were the only moments in his day when he could escape the aching silence of his home. 3 months had passed since his daughter, Emily, stopped speaking to him. Not because of a fight, no shouting, no dramatic parting. It was the slow kind of silence that settles after too much pain has been left unspoken. She barely looked at him now, her eyes sunken, her bedroom door always closed. He knew something was wrong, he had always known, but he was afraid to say the wrong thing, afraid to make it worse. Thomas had once been a man of certainty. A high school science teacher for over 2 decades, he had answers for everything. Chemical equations, Newton's laws, climate models, his world was predictable, explainable. But in the last year, life had spun so far out of control that formulas and logic no longer made sense. His wife's illness, followed by her slow, agonizing passing, had shattered the quiet rhythm of their lives. Grief had filled their home like thick fog, clinging to every surface. Emily was just 17, still a child in so many ways, and her mother's death had carved a hollow into her chest that Thomas didn't know how to fill. Now his morning walks were the only thing that gave him space to think, to feel, to break down in private. He chose different paths each day, as if hoping that unfamiliar roads might offer new thoughts, maybe even healing. This morning, his feet carried him toward the north side of town, past the shuttered diner and the empty soccer fields, toward the old railway bridge that hadn't been used in years. Locals called it Briar's Bridge, a place teenagers went to take photos or smoke under the cover of trees. Thomas had avoided the bridge ever since Susan's funeral. It was too quiet, too isolated, too full of ghosts. But today, something compelled him forward. Maybe it was the heavy stillness in his chest or the way the wind whispered through the trees. Maybe it was fate, though he wasn't sure he believed in that anymore. The gravel path gave way to cracked pavement as he neared the bridge. Rusted railings lined each side, ivy creeping over the edges. Birds scattered as he stepped onto the structure, their wings flapping wildly in protest. He stopped near the center of the bridge, about to turn around when something caught the corner of his eye. A flash of blue, like a jacket or maybe a backpack. At first he thought it was nothing, a trick of light perhaps, but then he looked closer and saw a figure, still as stone, standing dangerously close to the edge of the railing. It was a young person, slim frame, hunched shoulders, face hidden under a hoodie. Their hands were gripping the metal bar, knuckles white. Thomas's breath caught. He knew immediately what he was seeing, even though his mind screamed to deny it. He took a slow step forward, then another, careful not to startle them. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, each beat louder than the last. "Hey," he called softly, voice barely above a whisper. "It's a cold morning to be out here." No response. The figure didn't move. He tried again. "I come out here to think sometimes. Just get some peace, you know." Still nothing. Now only a few feet away, Thomas could see that it was a boy. No older than his daughter, maybe 16 or 17. His shoulders trembled, and when Thomas looked closer, he saw tears on the boy's cheeks. His eyes were red, hollow, as if the world had already emptied him out. Thomas wanted to say something profound, something that would reach into the boy's soul and pull him back from the edge. But all he had were his own broken pieces, scattered and fragile. "My name's Thomas," he said quietly. "I'm not here to make you do anything. Just thought maybe you didn't want to be alone right now." The boy turned his head just slightly, eyes flickering toward Thomas for a brief second, long enough for Thomas to see the fear in them, and something else. Desperation, hope, maybe both. They stood in silence, wind weaving around them, the bridge groaning faintly under their feet. Thomas didn't move closer. He didn't reach out. He simply stood there, one broken soul recognizing another. In that moment, nothing else existed, no past, no future, just the unbearable weight of the present and the fragile thread between life and death. He didn't know it then, but this walk, this quiet, cold walk, was about to become the most important moment of his life. And maybe, just maybe, someone else's too. Thomas didn't know how long they stood there, he and the boy at the edge of the bridge. Time seemed to stretch and bend, refusing to follow its usual path. The chill in the air deepened, settling into his bones, but he didn't move. Any sudden gesture might shatter the thin veil holding the boy back from the brink. The boy shifted slightly, enough that Thomas noticed the worn canvas of his sneakers scuffing the ledge. A movement so small, so quiet, but in it Thomas felt the danger intensify. His chest tightened. He took a breath. Not the kind meant to fill the lungs, but the kind needed to hold yourself together. "You remind me of someone," Thomas said gently, his voice floating across the space between them. "My daughter Emily, she's 17, been real quiet lately. Lost, I think, like a part of her went missing, and I can't seem to find it for her." No response, but the boy's fingers twitched slightly on the rusted railing. "I'm not good at saying the right thing," Thomas continued. "Never have been, especially not since her mother passed. I walk a lot now, try to outrun the silence. Doesn't really work though." Still, the boy said nothing, but Thomas saw something shift. The slight tilt of his head, maybe, or the way his shoulders relaxed just a bit. Thomas could feel the moment softening, and he leaned into it, not with force, but with a quiet persistence like waves against a cliff. "You got anyone?" he asked gently. "Anyone who knows where you are right now?" The boy shook his head slowly, barely, but it was an answer. And it broke something in Thomas. "No one," he echoed, his voice cracking. "That's a hard place to be. It's cold out here, but being alone like that, that's colder." The boy's hand gripped the railing tighter. Thomas's heart thudded in his ears again. He had no plan, no words rehearsed. Just raw instinct and a pulsing need to keep this boy alive. The boy who had no name yet. The boy who mirrored the same silent suffering he saw in Emily's eyes every day. "When my wife died, I didn't talk to anyone either. I thought I had to stay strong for Emily, for everyone, but inside I was unraveling," he said. "Still am, some days. I know what it feels like to want the pain to stop so badly you'd do anything just to make it go quiet." The wind picked up, rustling the trees around the bridge. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting. The boy finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. "It doesn't stop," he whispered. "No matter what I do, it never stops hurting." Thomas nodded slowly, stepping just a little closer, cautious not to crowd him. "You're right," he said. "It doesn't stop completely, but it changes. Some days it eases, some days it doesn't, but you don't have to carry it alone. You really don't." The boy's lip trembled. He blinked fast, as if trying to push back the tears that were already spilling. His hands loosened slightly on the railing. "I'm tired," he said, "so tired of pretending I'm okay." Thomas swallowed the lump rising in his throat. Every part of him wanted to step in, to wrap the boy in his arms, to pull him back from the edge, but he knew the risk. One wrong move could send him falling. "You don't have to pretend with me," Thomas said softly. "You don't have to be okay right now. You just have to stay." The boy looked at him then. Really looked. Brown eyes, rimmed red and filled with a kind of pain that felt too old for such a young face. There was a question behind those eyes, a flicker of trust, or maybe just a hope that someone might finally mean it when they said, "You're not alone." "I'm scared," the boy said, his voice breaking. Thomas took a step closer, slowly lifting his hand, not to grab, not to pull, just to show he was there. "Open, steady, so am I," he said, "every day, but I'm still here. And if you stay, I'll stay with you, for as long as it takes." A long silence followed, thick with emotion. The wind died down, the leaves stopped rustling. It was as if the world had gone quiet just for them. And then, finally, the boy took a step back, not much, just one step, but it was enough. Thomas exhaled sharply, relief washing through him like a flood. He moved forward, slowly, gently placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy didn't flinch. Instead, he let out a sob, sharp and sudden, and collapsed into Thomas's arms. They stood like that for a long time, the two of them alone on an old bridge where sorrow had almost won. Thomas held him as he wept, his own tears mixing silently with the boy's, not as a savior, not as a hero, just as one human being who had dared to stop and care. And though the morning had started in silence and pain, that single step back from the edge had become the beginning of something neither of them could yet understand. But it was enough. Thomas didn't remember taking the final few steps onto the bridge. One moment he was watching the boy from afar, heart pounding in his chest, and the next he was standing a few feet away, the air between them charged with something heavy and electric, like the sky. Just before a storm, the boy's back was to him, shoulders hunched under a navy hoodie soaked slightly from the mist in the air. His hands gripped the railing, fingers curled tightly around rusted metal, white, knuckled and rigid. He was barely moving, just the rise and fall of breath, and even that seemed hesitant, as if any breath might be his last. Thomas swallowed hard, his throat dry despite the dampness in the air. He didn't want to startle him. He didn't want to say the wrong thing, but doing nothing would be worse. His voice, when it came, was soft and calm, almost foreign to his own ears. "Hey," he said gently, "you okay?" It was a stupid question. He knew it the moment it left his lips. Of course the boy wasn't okay. No one stood that close to the edge of a bridge for the view. Still, it was a place to begin. There was no response. The boy didn't flinch, didn't turn, just stood there with the wind tugging at his sleeves. Thomas took another step forward, slow and cautious, like approaching a wounded animal. His heart was hammering now, panic rising just beneath the surface. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would cut through the boy's despair like a warm knife through ice. But all he had were raw, imperfect words, pulled straight from the ache in his own chest. "I come here sometimes too," he said. "Just to think, to breathe, when it all feels like too much." Still no reply, but Thomas kept going. "My name's Thomas," he said. "I'm not here to bother you. I saw you and I couldn't keep walking." A long silence followed. The wind picked up, rattling the brittle branches of the trees behind them. Thomas waited, his breath hanging in the air like smoke. Then, finally, a voice barely more than a whisper. "You should have kept walking." It wasn't cruel, just empty. Resigned, Thomas's chest tightened. "I used to think that too," he said, stepping closer, careful to keep his distance. "That people were better off if I stayed quiet, stayed away. But then I realized something. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It just makes the pain grow louder." The boy's shoulders tensed. Thomas saw it. The small reaction, the way his fingers loosened slightly on the railing. "I lost my wife last year," Thomas said. "Cancer. She was the kindest person I've ever known, bright, warm, and when she was gone it was like the sun stopped rising. My daughter Emily, she shut down, won't talk to me much anymore. It's like I'm living with a ghost." He didn't know why he was telling the boy this. Maybe because it felt right. Maybe because sharing his pain was the only way to reach the boy through his own. "I thought about this place a lot," Thomas admitted. Thought about how easy it would be to just let go, stop hurting, stop pretending I knew how to go on. The boy turned slightly. Thomas could see the curve of his cheek now, the line of his jaw, his skin pale and streaked with dried tears. "But I didn't," Thomas said, "and I'm still here, still hurting, yeah. But I'm also still walking, and this morning that brought me to you." The boy sniffled. He looked down at his feet, one of which was dangerously close to the edge. "I don't want to feel this anymore," he said, his voice cracking. "It's like there's a hole inside me and nothing fills it. No one sees me, no one cares." Thomas felt a wave of emotion crash over him. He took another step, close enough now that if the boy slipped, he could reach him. But he didn't reach out yet. Not until the boy was ready. "I see you," Thomas said quietly. "Right now, I see you and I care." Tears welled in the boy's eyes again. He shook his head. "You don't even know me." "No." Thomas agreed, but I know what pain looks like. I see it in my daughter every day. I see it in the mirror every morning, and I see it in you right now. You don't have to be alone in this. The boy's body trembled. He turned just slightly toward Thomas now, more than before, as if searching for something. Strength, maybe, or permission to believe. Thomas softened his voice even further. I don't have all the answers, he said. But I can tell you this, whatever you're carrying, it won't crush you if you let someone help you carry it. The boy's lips parted. He took a shaky breath. Then, slowly, he lifted one foot and stepped down from the ledge. Not back onto the bridge completely, but enough that Thomas could finally breathe again. He didn't rush in. He waited for the boy to look up to give him permission. When it came just a faint nod, eyes filled with tears, Thomas stepped forward and opened his arms. The boy collapsed into them. Thomas held him tightly, as if holding together the pieces of someone on the verge of shattering. No words passed between them, just the sound of crying, of breathing, of a heart slowly returning to the world. For the first time in a long time, Thomas didn't feel powerless, and the boy, whose name he still didn't know, was no longer alone. They stood like that, on a bridge that had almost swallowed one more life, and chose something else. They chose to stay. They sat on a cold bench just beyond the bridge, the boy wrapped in Thomas's coat now, the sleeves hanging long past his hands. The wind had softened, and the sun was beginning to rise just enough to bleed gold into the sky, pushing away the gray. They hadn't spoken much in the walk back, only exchanged glances, brief, unsure. But something had shifted. There was a fragile thread of trust now, thin as spider silk, but it held. Thomas rubbed his hands together, more out of nerves than cold. The adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving him hollow and tired, but alert in a way he hadn't felt in months. It was the boy who broke the silence first. My name's Caleb. It was barely a whisper, as though even that small offering was a risk. Thomas turned to him, met his eyes, and gave a soft nod. Thank you, Caleb, he said, for trusting me. Caleb looked down at the gravel beneath his shoes. I didn't know what else to do. It just felt like everything was getting smaller, like there was no room left to breathe. Thomas knew that feeling all too well. He remembered how he'd stood in his kitchen one night, the house too quiet, his wife's favorite mug still untouched on the shelf, and felt the walls closing in. That kind of pain didn't shout. It whispered, slowly, steadily, until you couldn't hear anything else. You're not weak for feeling that way, Thomas said gently. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It just means you've been hurting too long without anyone helping you hold it. Caleb's jaw clenched, and he nodded once, quickly, like someone who had heard so much judgment in his life that even kindness now made him wary. I tried to tell someone before, he said, voice cracking, a teacher once, but I don't think she believed me, or maybe she didn't know what to say. It just made everything worse. Thomas leaned back, staring out at the bare trees ahead. He didn't speak right away. He didn't want to give easy answers. He'd learned in grief and in pain that some things couldn't be solved. They could only be witnessed. Carried, I'm sorry she didn't hear you, he said at last. You deserve to be heard. Caleb swallowed hard, his gaze still fixed on the ground. My dad left when I was 9. My mom's around, but not really. She drinks a lot, doesn't ask where I go, doesn't notice when I don't come home. I guess I just started to believe that maybe I didn't matter. Thomas blinked hard against the tears forming in his own eyes. He reached out slowly, placing a hand on Caleb's shoulder. The boy didn't pull away. You do matter, Thomas said, steady now, even if she can't see it. Even if your world's told you otherwise, you matter. Something inside Caleb cracked at those words. His shoulders shook again, and he wiped at his face quickly with the sleeve of Thomas's coat, trying to hide the tears. But Thomas didn't look away. He didn't let him shrink back into silence. When my wife was sick, Thomas said, his voice low, I kept thinking I had to be strong for her, for Emily. I pushed everything down, all the fear, all the anger. I thought if I just held on long enough, I could carry it all, but after she died I broke. I didn't even notice at first. I was still getting up every day, still teaching, still making dinner, but I was gone inside. Caleb looked at him now, not with pity, but with something more, recognition. I think that's how I've been for a while, he said. Like I'm still here, but not really. Thomas nodded. Sometimes we need someone else to remind us how to come back. The morning light grew stronger, casting soft shadows across the path. Caleb pulled the coat tighter around himself, his breathing steadier now. He looked at Thomas, and for the first time there was a faint spark behind the pain in his eyes. "Why did you stop?" he asked. "You didn't have to. You could have just walked past." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I saw someone who looked like they were fading, and I know what that looks like. I saw it in my wife, I see it in my daughter, and I saw it in myself. And today I saw it in you, and I couldn't let you disappear too." Caleb blinked hard and looked away, overwhelmed. Thomas didn't press further. "It's okay," he added softly. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. You just have to stay, and I'll help you through whatever comes next." Caleb didn't say anything, but he gave the smallest nod, not a dramatic gesture, not a tearful promise. Just a quiet agreement, a beginning. They sat in silence again, but now it was different. It wasn't the silence of loneliness or despair. It was the silence of understanding. Of two people who had found each other in a moment when it mattered most. And as the sun finally crested the tree line, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope, not for everything to be perfect, not for all the pain to vanish. The morning stretched slowly into a quiet, uncertain day. Thomas and Caleb sat for a long time on that bench near the bridge, neither of them in a rush to break the spell of stillness that had settled between them. There was something sacred about that kind of silence, the kind that doesn't demand conversation, just presence. And in that presence, something fragile was being rebuilt, moment by moment. Eventually, Caleb spoke again, asking if Thomas could take him somewhere, not home, but somewhere safe. He didn't specify at first, just said he couldn't go back. Thomas didn't ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. Instead, he nodded and offered what he could, a warm car, a quiet space, and a listening ear. They ended up at a small diner on the edge of town, one Thomas hadn't been to in years. The kind with chipped coffee mugs and a jukebox that hadn't played music in decades. They sat in a booth by the window, steam rising from their mugs of cocoa. Caleb had insisted he didn't want coffee, and for a while they just sat. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, seemed to sense something delicate was happening. She didn't ask questions, just refilled their drinks and left an extra plate of toast on the table without a word. Caleb picked at the crust, his appetite still wary, but the tension in his shoulders had softened. His hoodie hung over the back of the booth now, Thomas's coat still draped over him like a shield. "My school doesn't even know I'm gone," Caleb said quietly, eyes watching the cars pass on the street outside. "Sometimes I disappear for a day or two and no one says anything, not the teachers, not my mom, just no one." Thomas's stomach turned. He wanted to fix it, to call someone, to gather the world by the shoulders and shake it until it noticed this boy. But he knew that wasn't what Caleb needed, not yet. "You're not invisible to me," Thomas said. "You weren't this morning, and you're not now, and you don't have to go through this alone anymore." Caleb turned toward him then, really looked at him. The words seemed to take root somewhere deep inside, a place where wounds had long since scarred over from neglect. He nodded slowly. It wasn't a grand gesture, but Thomas knew it meant everything. Later that day, after checking in with a local crisis counselor Thomas knew through the school, they found a safe house that specialized in teens like Caleb, kids who had fallen through the cracks, who needed time and care to heal. It was warm, quiet, and full of soft, spoken people who didn't ask too many questions too quickly. Caleb agreed to stay for a few nights, just a few. That was all he could promise, but it was a start. Thomas left his number with the staff, made sure Caleb had his too, and promised sincerely, clearly, without conditions, that he would be there if Caleb ever needed him. As he drove away that afternoon, the road ahead seemed different, softer, like something heavy had lifted from his shoulders. In the days that followed, Thomas found himself thinking about Caleb constantly, not with worry, but with hope. He sent him a short text each morning, thinking of you, you matter, no pressure to reply, and sometimes he didn't. But sometimes he did. The messages started small, thanks, still here, can't sleep, do you ever feel like that? And Thomas answered, not with lectures, not with therapy, just with honesty. Yeah, a lot, but it passes eventually. You're not alone. One day, Caleb texted, do you think people like us can get better, like really better? Thomas stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, I think we don't get better the way people expect. I think we learn to live with the pain instead of inside it. And I think we find reasons to keep going. People who help us, people we help. He hit send and added, you're already helping me. Weeks passed. Winter deepened, the house stayed quiet, but something was shifting inside it. One evening, Thomas came home to find Emily in the kitchen. She was making a grilled cheese sandwich, humming quietly to herself. She looked up when he walked in, really looked at him. And for the first time in months, their eyes met and didn't turn away. I heard you helped someone, she said almost cautiously. A boy from school? Thomas nodded slowly. Yeah, his name's Caleb. We met by chance. It wasn't something I planned. Emily was quiet for a moment, then said, he's lucky. Thomas blinked, his throat tightening. I think I was too. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It wasn't full of fear or sadness. It was peaceful. And then in a voice so small he almost missed it, Emily asked, can I meet him someday? Thomas smiled, his heart warming in a way it hadn't in a long time. Yeah, he said, I think he'd like that. It didn't all change at once. Healing never comes in a single moment. It arrives slowly, like the morning sun inching over the horizon. But from that day forward, something new existed in their lives, the quiet proof that even in the darkest moments, compassion could turn pain into connection. A walk that was meant to escape the world had become the bridge back to it for both of them.